Okay, next up, yeah, who who else did I meet? No, at the beginning of the 20th century, right? What's her name? What's her name? And I'm just accumulating weight. Ooh, sorry about that. Hello and welcome to another video. My name is Heather, and as always, I'm reading with a vengeance, and I hope you are too. How is everybody doing? I am glad that everybody is here, new and returning viewers. Thank you so much for coming back. As I usually do with my end of the month wrap-ups, I like to start off with a little bit of a life update. Not a whole lot going on except two things that I will share with you. One thing is I had my Booktube birthday in February. So I will be doing a tag video, but in that tag video, here's the important part, I will be doing a giveaway. And I think it's a pretty good giveaway. Of course, I'm not going to share any details with you right here. I thought that instead of just doing a quick 2-minute, hey, I'm doing a giveaway, here's the giveaway and here's what you have to do, I thought I'd do the birthday tag video to answer some questions. So that'll be coming out soon. The other thing I'll share with you is I just had a conversation with my mom today, so I know that it's 99% going to happen. And I had been debating on whether or not I was going to go to London again for the Women's Prize for Fiction live show. And I've decided that I am going to go, and I'm going to be turning it into kind of a longer trip. I'm probably going to be visiting France and then cruising over to London for the live show, and I'm going to be bringing my mom along with me. So that's really exciting. I wanted, of course, to talk to her about it and see if she was interested in going. I mean, to be truthful, I'd say, hey, Mom, you want to take a trip to the moon with me? And she would be on board, literally. Other than that, nothing really exciting is going on here in Savannah, Georgia. Oh my God, yes there is. Oh, I have to share this with you. Jeez. I can't believe I almost forgot to tell you guys this, but because I've been blathering on about it to everybody that will listen, I just had it in my mind that I'd already told everybody, but I haven't told you guys. So about a week and a half ago, we had the Savannah Book Festival, and it's a big deal. A lot of authors come in and they give talks, they give panels, they do signings. It's a big deal. And because I work for a very popular, I would say famous bookshop, all the authors come into the store and sign their books. So I got to meet a couple of authors that way. I met Ruth Ware, I met Cy Montgomery, but here's the big deal that happened. So the owner of the shop decided to put on an author party at her house. And for starters, she lives in one of the old brownstone, beautiful homes that Savannah's known for. So to be able to go to a party in one of those homes, it was really just an experience in and of itself. But here's the big deal. Knowing the authors that were going to be there, what I thought was going to happen was I was going to go to this party and I was going to stand in a corner and admire these authors from afar as they mingled with each other. And that's not how it went at all. I had some in-depth, wonderful conversations with S.A. Cosby, Ruth Ware, Susan Meisner, Cy Montgomery, Michael Finkel, which I had no idea that he was the hoot that he was. I had such a great, and if you don't know, he wrote the book, The Art Thief, which I haven't read yet, but now I almost want to just because I had such a good time talking to him. Grady Hendrix was at the party and I had a conversation with him. And so I got to mingle with these folks as if I was at a party with a bunch of family and friends. It was such a delight and so much fun to be able to sit and chat with S.A. Cosby. I cannot even begin to articulate what a treat that was for me. Ruth Ware asked me if she can get me a drink, and she did. Yeah, what universe? And I felt so bad. I feel so bad because I've talked on this channel before about breaking up with Ruth Ware. While I understand like her books are probably not going to be for me anymore, having read her books and enjoyed one or two of them, and then to talk to this woman who is just such a delight. And my coworkers were like looking at me having this conversation from across the room, and like were wondering if I was going to be, dressing Ruth Ware down, for having characters that disappoint me. And that's not how it went down at all, I promise. It was just the best party I have ever been to in my life. It was like an Oscar after party or something like that. Just an unforgettable experience. So I'm super grateful that I'm in a position to be able to do that. And I'm super grateful I work for these phenomenal women who just go above and beyond to make our work experience next level. So yeah, that was the highlight of the month. And anyways, what we're here to talk about is the books that I read in the second half of February. And we're just going to get to that now. The first book I'll mention is Northwoods by Daniel Mason. I read this because it is assigned to me for judging the Booktube prize, so I can't really say anything about it here. Until our rankings are submitted at the end of March, we can't really say whether we like a book or didn't like a book or anything about it until this round is over. So I will be posting a video of my review and rankings of all 6 books I read for the Booktube prize at the beginning of April when the round is over. The next book I'll talk about is Mouse, Volume 1 by Art Spiegelman. This is a graphic novel, and I would say it's a graphic, semi-autobiographical, semi-memoir, because what this talks about is a young man, and I use the word man loosely, but it's a young man who's learning about his father's experience during the Holocaust and during World War II. As a Jewish man. What's different about this story is that all the characters are depicted as animals, and the main characters are mice. The Nazis are depicted as cats. I believe police officers are pigs. I think there's some dogs thrown in there, but our main characters are mice, and I forget names. The story goes kind of back and forth in time as the elderly father is telling his son the story. And it's a harrowing story, as any story about the Holocaust is. It's harrowing and sad. You can see how the father gets frustrated with his son as he's telling him the story, and the way he treats his second wife. You can tell the way it's written that there are so many things that he experienced during World War II as a Jewish man that has bled over into his current life. I think that's what I got the most out of this story, how trauma can affect you basically for the rest of your life, how it can affect your personality permanently, especially if it's not really addressed, how it affects how you treat people, how you take other people in. I read that this is supposedly like the greatest graphic novel ever written. I wouldn't go that far. It was interesting. It was a little bit long. So I've read a lot of novels that take place during World War II, and having read a bunch of stories previous, I didn't find this one a standout. I thought it was clever, the way the way the characters were depicted. I mean, you can do so much in a graphic novel, right? You could take such creative liberties, and I can appreciate that. But I mean, the story itself didn't really move me in a way that other stories have. But Mouse has gotten a lot of talk here on Booktube, and so I was curious. So I read it. I probably won't be reading volume 2, even though this one ended in kind of a cliffhanger. I'm not so interested that I'll read the second volume to find out what happens. It satisfied the curiosity that I had for this graphic novel. If you have the same curiosity, I would recommend it, but don't go in with super high expectations. But yeah, I'm glad I read it. It was just a little slow for me, and I ticked that box. Next up is another graphic novel. I read volume 1 of Paper Girls by Brian K. Wilson. He's the writer. Cliff Chang was the illustrator, and Matt Wilson was the colorist. The premise kind of got my attention because it takes place in the late 80s. I graduated high school in the late 80s, so the 80s are super nostalgic for me. I was an 80s kid. This one follows four 12-year-old girls who run a paper route. One night, I believe it's Halloween night, they're out and about, and they come across this device that's rather mysterious. But once they come in contact with this device, strange things start happening. And I don't want to give too many details if you are at all interested in reading this. I don't want to spoil anything, and I think it's better if you go in blind. But also, I can't go into a whole lot of detail with this book because I think mostly with the first volume, you're getting to know the characters and kind of a basis of what happens, but the explanation behind this device, where it comes from, what it's for, the things it causes, I think those details come in later volumes because I kind of finished this story with more questions than answers. So I can't really explain a whole lot about this book, but I did enjoy it. I enjoyed getting to know the characters. They're 12 years old. They read a little bit older because they're very sassy. They have potty mouths. Certainly more of a potty mouth than I had. I didn't get my potty mouth until I was like 15 years old. So the dialogue was snappy and very much of the time I enjoyed that. The illustrations were appealing. I thought the color scheme was appealing. It was very 80s, almost not neon colors, but just deep like blues and pinks, which just was very reminiscent of the 80s for me. So even though I don't have a full handle of everything that's going on after the first volume, I still get the sense that it's these four young girls who are going to be kind of standing up to an evil that's come to town or come to earth or something. I'm not really quite sure. And I like these four girls. They're interesting. I want to know more about them. So I had a good time with this. I will be reading the second volume when I can get my hands on it. I did enjoy it. If you are at all interested in it, I would recommend it if you like graphic novels. If you're a child of the 80s, there's a sci-fi aspect to it. And again, I'm really not sure if it's a time travel thing, an alien thing. I'm not quite sure. And I don't think anybody who has just read the first volume is sure, but it was fun. I mean, I got through it in a couple of hours. So yeah, I'm glad I read it and I'd recommend it. Next thing that I read isn't really a novel. I guess it would be considered nonfiction, but it was a collection of 4 nonfiction stories. The collection is called Rivals, Frenemies Who Changed the World. It's by Scott McCormick. And I believe this was a freebie that I got on the Audible app. So I listened to it. And they are 4 little stories about actual people in history whose rivalry is what actually made history. Now, 3 of the rivalries you'll be familiar with. The 4th one I wasn't very familiar with. It was Cope versus Marsh. They were paleontologists and they got into a lot of trouble in the whole paleontology world, discovering fossils and dinosaurs, and their rivalry kind of messed up the whole science community. So it was somewhat interesting, but I had never heard of them. But what they did and how they messed things up for other scientists, that was fascinating. The other 3 you might be more familiar with. You had the people who came up with Adidas sneakers versus the people who came up with Puma sneakers. That was fascinating. Then, of course, you had the Hamilton versus Aaron Burr, which most of us are familiar with, and that was fascinating. And then, of course, you had Elizabeth I versus Mary Queen of Scots, which I am aware of their rivalry, but I really didn't have any grasp on why they were rivals and how it unfolded, and that was really, really interesting to listen to. So if you are interested in any of those stories, I would highly recommend this. The only thing that I would say as a criticism to this little audio package, there are certain like sound effects that are thrown in there for fun, and it could have been gone without. Some of them are funny. A few of them are kind of annoying, but it's not so much that it ruins the audio. But the stories about these rivalries, I thought, with the exception of Cope versus Marsh, I mean, that was okay. That's the first one. The other three are quite interesting, I thought. For instance, the founder of Adidas and the founder of Puma sneakers, they were brothers. The things they did and the Jesse Owen things during the Olympics right around the time of World War II, just fascinating. The whole how it came about that, well, basically how endorsements came about. Fascinating. It all started with this rivalry between Adidas and Puma. And again, the whole thing between Elizabeth I and Mary Queen of Scots, I thought was fascinating. And if you want, it's just very bare bones. The history is told in kind of layman's terms, easy to understand, with humor involved, which I thought was very, very helpful to understand a lot of this history. So I'm so glad I read it. I'm so glad I found it. It's free on Audible and it's fairly short. I think the whole thing was maybe 2.5 hours long. They're very condensed versions of the story, but like I said, it just gives you a foundation of the information if you're interested in those particular relationships in history. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it. All right, next up, this book will look familiar to you because I featured it on my new releases that I'm excited to come out in March. Of course, I got my hands on an ARC and I decided to read it, and that is The Great Divide by Cristina Henriquez. This is historical fiction and it takes place during the construction of the Panama Canal, which happened at the beginning of the 20th century. And in this story, you're following a collection of different characters who are somewhat connected to each other with the construction of the Panama Canal as a backdrop. I went into this very excited. I love historical fiction. I love learning about certain big events that have happened in our history, but I like learning it in the way that it is presented in historical fiction. Like I like reading about fictional characters as the real events happen in the background, and I like learning about those real events as they are experienced by fictional characters. So that is why I like historical fiction so much, and that's how I like learning about history. I almost failed out of history in school. It's so dry. So I went into this very, very excited. I really didn't know a whole lot about the Panama Canal and its construction and who was involved and why and all of this. And even geographically, I mean, I kind of had to look up a map. I had a basic idea of where Panama was, but as far as having a mental picture of where the canal was, I really didn't know. And that's just one of the things that I just really, really enjoy about historical fiction. So now I do know. So this one you are following, I would say, 3 main characters. You have Ada, who is a 16-year-old girl from Barbados, and she has come over to Panama to try to earn some money to pay for a very expensive surgery for her sick sister back home. And then you're also following Omar, who is around 18-ish, maybe 20, and he is a Panamanian. He works on a crew that is digging through to make the canal itself. Omar's father, Francisco, who is very much against the canal. He hates the idea of the canal. He thinks it is a blight on his country. He doesn't like that the Americans have come over and are kind of taking over the area. And he hates the idea that his son is working on the Panama Canal. And then you have John Oswald, who has come to Panama. He's a doctor. He's come to Panama with his wife, Marion, from New Orleans, and he wants to come to help eradicate the malaria epidemic. And how these 3 characters are connected is Ada. So Omar is working on the canal, and they work all of these diggers and laborers to the bone, 16-hour days, hard labor. And Omar, being the young man that he is, he collapses one day and nobody helps him except Ada. Ada sees him and she goes to him and she helps him and holds his hand and sings to him and gets water for him and makes sure he gets to a doctor. John Oswald sees this whole interaction, and his wife has fallen ill to malaria and he needs somebody to help care for her. So John hires Ada to care for his wife. That's how kind of these characters are connected. It started off quite well. I was very interested. I was drawn in by Ada's story. You start off following Ada, and I was drawn in immediately by the origins, basically, of each of these characters. The tension between Omar and his dad, the struggle that Ada has to come across the ocean from Barbados, and the relationship that she has with her sister who's ill, and her mom who is working herself to the bone to try to earn money to pay for this surgery. I would say the Oswald storyline isn't as engaging, but it helps to connect the two other storylines. So it was okay. But as the story went on, I mean, you really didn't learn a whole lot about the Panama Canal itself. You certainly didn't learn anything about, I don't know, the day-to-day of this event through the characters other than Omar. And all you really learned about it through Omar was just the grueling, back-breaking work. And then the other thing that I really had a hard time with, that I just didn't care for with this story, is that every character you met, you would learn about their backstory. For instance, Omar's dad would go out fishing every morning, and then he'd come back and he'd take his fish to this market, and he'd take it to this one particular vendor, and they would chat a little bit. That was all good and fine, but then we'd start following Joaquin and his wife and their neighbors, and how they were going to protest them moving their little town to make way for this dam that will help the Panama Canal function. And you would follow a bunch of different side characters that had no real bearing on the main story itself. There were too many side characters that got into too much detail on their backstory that I just didn't think was necessary. And I wanted to know more about Omar, and I wanted to know more about Ada. And it just meandered way too much. It just got off course, I thought. And it slowed down quite a bit. So the first third of the book I blazed through, and then the second third, and even the end of the book, I mean, I was ready for it to be over, unfortunately. So it was okay. It was well written, accessible, and I didn't feel like the writing style got in the way of anything. I'm not quite sure about recommending this. If you are interested in the story, obviously. I mean, I always like to end with whether or not I recommend this book. If you've been excited about this book, I don't want to put a damper on that, but I just will give you that warning that it goes off on a couple of tangents on just inconsequential characters that I feel was unnecessary. I did learn more about the Panama Canal, so I'm happy about that. Let's end this on a positive note, shall we? And finally, the book that I enjoyed the most, I would say, in the last half of February is The Boys from Biloxi by John Grisham. Now, I say I enjoyed this the most. That's not really saying much. I didn't love this one. This one was too long. I actually ended up listening to this one because it became available on my Libby app, and I realized that I get through audiobooks so much faster than physical books. I'm just accumulating so many physical books that I decided that if they become available on audio, I'm going to go ahead and listen to them and then unhaul the physical books. Anyways, this one was like a good 20 hours long on audio, and the physical book is 450 pages. Now, I'm a huge fan of John Grisham. I love his stuff. This one had potential. So what the synopsis says, you're following Keith and Hugh, and they are childhood friends, and they went to like elementary school and middle school and high school. They played baseball together, but their fathers, who were childhood acquaintances, but they weren't really close friends, but they went kind of separate ways. So Keith's father ended up being a prosecutor, kind of a crime fighter, and Hugh's father was kind of the boss of what was known as the Dixie mob. So because of the paths their fathers took, as they got older, they went their separate ways as well. Hugh and Keith are not who you're really following in the story. The majority of this book, you're following their fathers. And mostly Keith's father, Jesse. I liked how it started off with Lance's parents and Jesse's parents were both immigrants from Eastern Europe. The beginning kind of got into how their families kind of made their way as immigrants in the United States. And I found that very interesting. And you really get to know where Lance comes from, and you really get to know where Jesse comes from. But the majority of the story is about Jesse. And Jesse's story is fascinating. I loved following Jesse's story, and I really wish that was kind of the premise of it. I went into this book thinking we were going to be following these two boys, Keith and Hugh, and that was just such a small part. It was a very small part of the beginning as you learn about their friendship when they're kids, and at the end, when you find the culmination of everything that's happened throughout Jesse's life and Lance's life and where it leads Keith and Hugh. It kind of all comes around full circle, but I just feel like I was a little misled. I feel like John Grisham had a couple of ideas, and they were ideas that weren't going to lead to full-length novels on their own. So he kind of mushed them together, and it just, I know I've used this word already in this video, it meandered. It meandered a lot. And the good thing about it is John Grisham is such a great storyteller. He knows how to flesh out his characters. You bond and connect with his characters so well that it's hard to realize that you are not getting the story that you bargained for. But I've been reading John Grisham a long time, and I felt duped here. So I didn't hate it. I'm glad I read it. Oh my gosh, it makes for a huge spot on my shelf that I can fill. And this will be a lovely deposit in a little free library somewhere. And it's a beautiful cover. I love this cover so much. It's just gorgeous. This is also misleading because it's not, I don't want to meander in my review of this meandering story. If you're a fan of John Grisham, you'll like it just because, like I said, he just knows how to tell a story, and his characters are always engaging, always. I've never read a boring John Grisham character, ever. So that's it. Those are the books that I read in February. Have you read any of these books? What did you think? What did you guys read in February? Did you guys read any bangers? I would love to hear about them. Please let me know. Or you can say hi down in the doodly-doo. If you're still watching at this point, please consider giving that like button a boop, and a subscribe would be great. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye!